Rhino Charge. Moving as quietly as he could, Akimbo made his way through the thick scrub bush. It was difficult to travel quietly, though, unless he also went slowly, and if he went slowly, then that would make him more likely to be attacked. He stopped for a moment and listened. The African night is never quiet. There was the sound of insects, a shrill screeching noise that never stopped. It was everywhere, behind him, around him, above him, and it was difficult to make out any other sound. Yet there it was. There was a sound which was different. Akimbo took a deep breath. For a few seconds he felt like shouting out in the hope that somebody might hear him, but he knew that there was nobody around, and shouting could make the situation even worse. He turned around. Did the sound come from behind? There was silence. Akimbo took another step and then stopped again. He was sure he had heard something. I'm being stalked. That means a lion, or maybe a leopard. The thought of the fierce animal behind him made his skin chill. He looked about for a tree and saw one a few yards away in the darkness. I can climb that. It's not high, but at least it'll give me some protection. Slowly he moved over to the tree and reached up for the first lower branches. His arms were weak with fear, but he still felt strong enough to pull himself up off the ground. Then, just as he began to raise himself, he heard a crashing sound behind him. The fear made him let go, and he dropped down in a heap, the wind knocked out of him. The crashing grew louder as the animals charged through the undergrowth. Akimbo tried to struggle to his feet, but his limbs would not respond. He was paralyzed with fright. The rhino moved with extraordinary speed. When Akimbo first saw it, it was a dark blur, heading straight towards him, and then in no more than a few seconds it had shot past, thundering off beyond the tree. Akimbo stayed quite immobile, and as the rhino moved off, the crashing sound grew fainter, and after a while there was quiet again. Akimbo picked himself up and found to his surprise that he was quite unhurt. The rhino must have missed him by inches. He started to walk again, dazed, overwhelmed by the closeness of his escape. He then realized that he must have been following the rhino for a while, and that they both had been equally surprised to find one another. When the rhino had eventually seen him, it had charged, but it had really only meant to get away. Akimbo now felt all his fear leave him. He had survived a trip with poachers, he had survived a charging rhino. He felt strong now, and he knew that he could make it home. Akimbo was to remember little of the few hours that followed. He walked quickly and tried to keep going in a straight line. He whistled for a while, and then remembered bruising himself on a rock which was hidden in the grass. And then at last there was a supreme moment when he saw the lights away to his left, almost obscured by the trees and not in the direction in which he would have expected them to be. Yet there was only one thing they could be, the lights of the ranger camp. His parents were already asleep by the time he reached home. His father woke up at the sound of the door being opened and got out of bed to see his son stagger in from the night. "Akimbo, what are you doing here?" Akimbo took some time to catch his breath again. Then, when he could speak, he blurted out his message. "There's a gang of poachers. They're in the reserve. They're after elephants." How on earth do you know?" Akimbo told him everything, and he watched his father's eyes bulge with surprise. "But what on earth made you do it?" his father asked, half in anger, half in astonishment. Akimbo did not give him an answer. "Look, father, just believe me. They're there. I know they're there. I can take you there." Akimbo's father looked doubtful. Then he appeared to make up his mind. He told Akimbo to stay where he was while he went off to summon the head ranger. It was up to him to decide what should be done next. The head ranger listened gravely to Akimbo's story. When it came to the description of how he had taken the ivory from the storeroom, he frowned and looked angry. "You shouldn't have done that. You know that was stealing." "But I only wanted to help. I couldn't let the poachers get away with it." "That's not your job," interrupted the head ranger. "It's not up to you to stop them." Akimbo was silent. It was so unfair that the poachers could get away with their greed and cruelty and nobody could stop them. Then, when somebody did try, all he got himself into was trouble. Akimbo looked at his father silently, appealing for help. "He has more to say," said his father quietly. "I think you should hear him out." The head ranger nodded, still frowning, but when Akimbo told him of his meeting with Matimba, he smiled and nodded, pleased at getting the first piece of firm evidence against the man who he had long suspected. At the end of Akimbo's tale, the head ranger rose to his feet and rubbed his hands together. Akimbo waited anxiously. "Thank you. Well done." And with those few words, Akimbo knew that everything would be all right. Or rather, it would all be right if they caught the poachers. If they didn't, then he was sure the blame would land fairly and squarely on himself. The head ranger now gave orders for all the rangers to be woken. They had to be ready to leave the camp within an hour. They would travel on foot, he said. The last thing he wanted was for the poachers to be given any warning of their presence. "Can you manage to walk?" he asked Akimbo casually. "You must be a bit tired." Akimbo swallowed. He doubted whether his legs could carry him any further, and the sight of his sleeping on the mat on the floor of their house had almost been too tempting. But he had started this, he would have to finish it, even if he dropped his shoes at the end of it all. "I'm fine," he replied cheerfully. "I can do it." 10 rangers set off. They were all armed and equipped with everything they'd need for a long hike. Akimbo walked beside the head ranger. Immediately behind him was his father, who encouraged him quietly whenever he seemed to be flagging. He had a good idea of the direction from which he had come, but he thought he recognized certain features: the tip of a hill, silhouetted black against the night sky, or a stretch of forest. But it all seemed so similar in the darkness that he knew he could be quite wrong. Just before dawn they stopped. As the light came up over the horizon and the sun painted the hills with red fire, Akimbo gazed around really puzzled. "Do you recognize anything?" whispered the head ranger. "Those trees over there? That hill?" Akimbo shook his head. It seemed so different. Everything seemed larger at night. The head ranger nodded. "Don't worry. We'll just go forwards very slowly. If you see something familiar, tap me on the arm. Don't speak." Slowly they made their way through the undergrowth. They were as quiet as they could be, but there were twigs underfoot which cracked when they trod on them. There were branches which swung back with a swishing sound when they bent them. One of the men coughed once or twice in spite of his efforts to suppress them. Akimbo was sure they were lost. Should he tell the head ranger now that he had no idea where they are, rather than let them waste more time? But just as he was about to attract the head ranger's attention, he saw it. There had been a cactus very close to where he had lain down and pretended to sleep, and now he saw it again. It was definitely the same one. There was the missing branch and the piece that bent down instead of up. He reached out to attract the head ranger's attention. "That's it," he whispered. "That's where I was." At a signal from the head ranger, all the rangers dropped to the ground. Then, half crawling, half running, they swiftly moved towards the cactus. There was nothing, no sign of the poachers at all. The rangers poked around under the bushes. One came across an empty water bottle and held it up for the others to see. Another found a couple of burnt-out matches and showed them to the head ranger. It was now the turn of the ranger who was most skilled at tracking. He walked about the site where the men had camped that night until he was satisfied that he could work out the direction they had followed. Then, just as the poacher's own tracker had done, he set off, following the signs of the ground, stopping from time to time to peer closely at the footprint or a tuft of grass that had been flattened by somebody's boot. "They're not far away," he said to the head ranger. "Nor are the elephants."